You're watching Global Today here on Morning Prime. Now, every major global climate record was broken. That is, the record was broken last year, and 2024 could be worse. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, said this on Tuesday, with its chief voicing particular concern about ocean heat and shrinking sea ice. The UN Weather Agency said in its annual State of the Global Climate Report that the average temperatures hit the highest level in 174 years of record, keeping by a clear margin, reaching 1.45 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Ocean temperatures also reached the warmest in 65 years of data, with over 90% of the seas having experienced heat wave conditions during the year. The WMO said harming food systems. The WMO community is sounding the red alert to the world, said WMO Secretary General, that is Celeste Saulo, who took over the job in January. She later told reporters that ocean heat was particularly concerning because it was almost irreversible, possibly taking millennia to reverse. Climate change driven by the burning of fossil fuels, coupled with the emergence of the natural El Niño climate pattern, pushed the world into record territory in 2023. Right, at least 10 people were killed in a wealthy suburb of Haiti's capital on Monday. There were reports of looting and thefts of electricity equipment cut the power supply as lawlessness spread to affluent areas and gangs tightened their grip on the city. A media witness saw at least 10 people dead, that is 10 bodies, at least some of which had bullet holes on Monday morning in the streets of upscale, that is Pétion-Villers, on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince, which were later removed by ambulance. Authorities have not commented on the events surrounding the deaths. Haitians also reported gunfire and looting on Monday morning in the nearby area of La Boulée. Later, the streets around Pétion-Villers were practically deserted. Meanwhile, the EDH electricity service said several stations had been attacked and that cables, batteries, and documents were stolen. Armed gangs, who have been increasing their power in recent years, took advantage of the absence earlier this month of Prime Minister Ariel Henry to escalate violence, attacking infrastructure, including police stations and government offices, under the international pressure. And stranded in Puerto Rico, the unelected Henry announced his resignation pending the appointment of a council and a temporary replacement a week ago. But the transition council has yet to be appointed amid disagreement by some of the groups putting forward representatives. A U.S. State Department spokesperson said the council's memberships could be finalized very soon and that an update could come later on Monday. And that is what we want to just focus on a bit right now. Let's just begin with you, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, with the latest development so far. Transition Council, there seems to be something that is in the offing, and that announcement will be made on Monday.
Well, a Transition Council is something that is going to be necessary. A lot of us here, we have cautioned about being able to deploy a multinational force without the necessary changes, especially political changes that can afford a new administration some kind of legitimacy. And that is in part because, as you have seen in the last few weeks, the population, it's not just the gangs, it's actually the population do not think that the current administration is legitimate. It has outlived its mandate. Even the parliamentarians who are there today, they're not supposed to be there according to the law and the constitution of Haiti itself. So this was supposed and was always going to be part of any deal for any continued engagement in that theater. Now, what is worrying also, though, is, just I think the last couple of days, we know that Congress has blocked, additional funding to the mission. Now, look at this. It's ridiculous. I think Biden was asking for $40 million. $40 million. Washington has funded like $200 billion, to Ukraine in the last, 2 years, except the recent efforts for $60 billion that, of course, is now being contested. But to the extent that that kind of small money is being blocked by Congress, Kenya has always been a country that prides itself in peace diplomacy. But I think questions we should ask is, since this is not exactly a UN-funded mission and is going to depend on well wishes, we need to be able to demand certain serious commitments from our partners if we actually have to proceed and put our men and women in uniform in harm's way. So what is happening today is, of course, a testament with, about the complexity, of Haiti itself and the fragility of that country. Now, 40 million or 100 million, 200 million, as they had said, to be honest, we will not do anything to be able to ensure that circumstances improve. It is too little money. One thing that would have helped, and of course Nairobi being a leading country in this process, we may have to ask our partners and others who want to support this mission and who are asking us to sacrifice ourselves in trying to extend, peace to those who need it, and especially people of African gene pool in the highland of Hispaniola, that a lot more funds are committed to doing other things. Haiti is a country that is arguably the poorest country on the face of the earth, and probably is messier than the messiest part of Afghanistan. You see, that's what we're talking about. So it is not anything that you can even conceive in your mind. Years of war, earthquakes, name it, tornadoes and stuff like that, completely destroy infrastructure. They have no clinics, they have no schools, they have no hospitals, they lack basic amenities for survival. These things are important in winning the hearts and minds of people and demonstrating to them that a mission such as the one we intend to do and lead, because so far, while you have others who are interested, Kenya is going to provide the largest chunk at this point. That such mission, one, is actually coming for good. Two, there could be investment in other areas that can transition people from the violent mentality. Part of the reason in Haiti, and I have lots of Haitian friends, and I lived with them for many years in Florida. In fact, last December I was hosting a number of them actually here in Nairobi. There is actually no middle class in Haiti. You have the very poor and those who are extremely rich. You see, and because
most mixed breed.
The
very
exactly.
rich ones are actually not pure blacks.
The mulattoes.
They are the mulattoes, yes.
Yes, the mulattoes.
Yes.
And so the ones who get into middle class, they live in the United States or other places in New York, in Florida, and stuff like that. Now, what happens is, because of the lack of critical institutions infrastructure, the middle class cannot stay there. And so for us, we need to be able to work with partners, and partners have to commit to giving people hope in trying to win the hearts and minds, because if we don't, gangs have thrived because they're able to provide one thing of the government, which is a principal function of the government: security for the people in there. As messed up as it is, they can provide quick jobs because there are actually no real jobs, in Haiti. There is no real economy that is functioning. And so if we cannot also invest in institutional development, invest in trying to have the world start investing in the economy so it can start growing, it's going to be extremely difficult to move away from the mentality. They pride themselves for being the first black republic. They've been independent for more than 200 years after kicking out their colonizers, But what has happened to them? So even with our peace diplomacy, which is a key pillar, again, in Kenya's foreign policy, so it's not exactly in contradiction to our own foreign policy engagement. We have to watch what's happening in the world. Finally, there is an election coming up in the United States in November. the Congress that has blocked this support is a Republican-controlled Congress. Considering the current polling, it looks like the Republicans will still control Congress on November 5th or 6th.
And the presidency.
And there is a likelihood they'll control the Senate and they may be controlling the president. If they are blocking it right now, what is the future of any mission in Haiti, especially if that mission was supposed to be supported by the government of the United States? And so it's a question we need to genuinely also pause and ask ourselves. Those are tough questions. They are uncomfortable, but we must confront them.
Right. And of course, also the biggest question is when you're talking about the Transition Council, we have, there was the calls from the US that there should be sort of a government of a coalition, right, between the gangs and the government of the day, and that never saw the light of day. Still, this call is there. If we have a Transition Council by Monday, and we have calls from this other side of the gang leaders that Kenya should not be having their boots on the ground, as it were. There is no favor from them, and they've decried and said that President William Ruto is a puppet of the West, as they perceive it. Do you think that being affected? Because when you're talking about a transitional council, it means then there has to be a happy medium. And what I bring on the table as some of the conditions has to be accepted by the other party. So is there any likelihood of this happening? Let me just throw this question to you, Dr. Kenobongi. Despite the fact, of course, there's a funding issue, but from the Transition Council itself.
Well, Dibal, we have actually hinted at that in this forum before. Any transitional arrangement that is not going to have a number of very clear characteristics is not going to succeed, as it were. One, the people we are calling gangs, the people we are calling militias and all sorts of labels, those are the people directly affected by this problem. The Haitians who are now in the streets are actual products of their own history. Unless they are directly involved and somebody understands the internal dynamics and which are driving the situation that we have now, it's not going to succeed. Haitians, by their very nature, actually hate with a passion anything that has any shred of imperial science. And any transition arrangement that has the blessing of any Western countries, let alone the United States, it's not likely to succeed. Because part of the problem that puts Kenya in a catch-22 is that very clear understanding that we are going to Haiti on the behest of the United States. We are not going to Haiti as an African country going to help another African country. No, we are going there in the behest of the United States. And that is bound actually to fail. Hassan asks, what is the future of such arrangements? We are going to have any transition arrangements. I would say actually the future is that there is no future in these processes unless the actors who are prone to violence now will be brought to the table and made to understand what their problem is and contribute in coming up with a solution. I like the idea that Hassan is talking about, showing the requisite goodwill to the people of Haiti, that the world means well. But we will have a lot of work to do to convince people who have gone through hundreds of years of slavery. They have never been free for, the over, I think, 200 years that they have been free. They have been bedeviled by natural disasters that, they have nothing to show to the world. They have nothing to lose. So I think as we grapple with the issue of either going, I'm told there's no option of not going, according to official indications now. We have to rethink the whole thing about what is going to be our role And how is that role going to be interpreted by, the militias and the people of Haiti, who are now in the streets, actually, virtually everybody. The violence is very clear. So I think there needs to be much more consultation, a little bit more of rethinking our strategy as a country. And in the face of what the American Congress has done, I wonder how far we are going to go, or how soon we are going to go to Haiti.
Mm-hmm. If history may bear us down as well, Professor Mashara Manene, just recently we saw that particular negotiations or the peace quest. We had Sudan and Kenya, Sudan decrying that President William Ruto should not be part of, Kenya should not be part of that conversation of making that Sudan come out of the turmoil they are in because they are considered biased. Isn't it the same premise that also this Transition Council may pick and run with it, of biasness that will affect the outcome of these boots on the ground?
Yeah, well, it's the so-called Transitional Council, if it ever comes to be, is starting on the wrong footing. For one, who is creating it? So you have some people meeting in Kingston, Jamaica, and then they say, we are creating a Transitional Council for Haiti. And it is not clear that the players, the real players in Haiti, are involved. So there is need for that. Talk to Barbecue, okay? Because he's a force. And his other colleagues, they are the ones controlling Haiti right now, not people sitting in Jamaica or in Washington and saying we are going to do this. So a way should be found of reaching out to Barbecue to see the point of having some sort of transition, because it is not going to happen unless he agrees. Short of that, assuming he's, and something has to be done, then it has to be a UN mission, not some UN assignment if some people go there. It might have to be a proper invasion of Haiti. And it's not a police action. It will be a military what? They say now you're just going to go and create peace. Huh? It's not, and so that is not a police assignment because it's a full military what? So you go there and really pacify, as the, in the Islamic colonialism, they used to call it what? Pacification. So they go on a pacification mission into Haiti and create institutions. But while doing that, as Hassan was saying, you really have to work on changing the minds of those people. And the guns will not do it. And the wrong people will not do it. You can't have the Secretary of State, Blinken, or even Biden, saying this is what will happen in Haiti. And people are listening to you, and you say, and who are you? Are you not part of the problem? Because, yes, when Haiti became independent in 1803 or 1804, and the US was a beneficiary of that, got a lot of land, the Louisiana Purchase, as a result of that. The same US and France went back and re-enslaved Haiti. Right. And took away all the resources and made Haiti perpetually bankrupt. So they know that. And when somebody tried to say, you people pay up something, Aristide, So what happened to Aristide when he tried to raise the issues? He's kicked out. They know these things. So the mind frame has to change. And there has to be people who are credible, whom the Haitians can listen. The question is right now, let's assume that we can find somebody in Africa that they will listen to, yeah? Who is it that they will listen to? Right now, they will not listen to us. When you can see what they are saying, you people are just puppets of somebody. And it doesn't matter where you go. If you are Kenyan and you find something, say, what are you people doing? So that has to change. So, yes, there's need to reach out to the leaders of the militias I don't want to say gangsters. These are militias. So, Richard, and so that they see. And then how to help them come together with that council. Failure to that, depending on how desperate the situation is, stop thinking of it as a police action. It's not. It will be pacification.
Right. Farah Mali. Let's hear from Farah. We'll come to you. Farah, we want to weigh on this. I think now we have the government's position until we have a transitional council. They're holding back, sending the troops.
Look, we have a number of cases in Africa to draw certain lessons from. The Americans went in with what they call Operation Restore Hope into Somalia and landed their boots there and tried to pacify the Somalis because there were too many warlords and aid food was not getting to the ordinary people who are needy and there were too many deaths. So they're literally what you would call, whatever you call them, clan militias or warlords, but tantamount to what is happening right now in Haiti in the form of in the form of organized groups. And then Americans, when they tried to do that, typical white young man, and decided we're going to civilize these blacks. Only to realize they were dealing with a country that was thousands of years older than them, and got the worst beatings in their history, and cut line and ran. Now, the Haitians are the closest to the Somalis because these people have a history in which they took on a white slave mentality, imperialist white regime that was there, a superpower in the world at the time, and bet them to trash and had them take off from the country. And then they came in cleverly through neocolonialism, advanced loans to them, and basically messed them, with soft power. Nothing like a hard power. So anybody who tries to go into Haiti now with a hard power might have an issue. But soft power is also not going to work. So then there is need to listen to the Haitians. The Somalis finally, what really changed is when the Islamic Courts came in. Islamic Courts were Somalis who were seeking justice and fairness and all that, and who are sick and tired of the warlords now looking for anybody with a beard. And I don't know if nobody else has a beard here except me. And sell them off to the Americans as Al-Qaeda. As Al-Qaeda. Those days there was no Al-Shabaab. And the madrasa teachers, the Quran teachers, the people going to the mosques, literally it was a bad thing. So they rose up against them. They bet them up fair and square in the shortest possible time, created a system of tranquility, stability, and fairness they never experienced anywhere else in that short period of time. For 6 months, Somalia was one country. I went there myself. You could walk at 3 o'clock in the morning, a girl 20 years old, or a man, or carry your bag of dollars on your back, and nobody will touch you. And I think the West got concerned that, look, here is an ideology, an Islamic ideology, which is doing better than we did ourselves. So let's find a way. And they got the Ethiopians to go and do the bidding for them and move in to occupy Somalia. And then another very powerful thing kicked in, which is Somali nationalism, which was what the Americans had paid a heavy price for before. The Ethiopians were beaten to hell. They lost 25,000 lives and were literally begging. Even some of them called me here to see if I can talk to them to be given a way out, just a way out. They were literally looking for. I sat with somebody, I don't want to mention him, but a very senior Ethiopian general who was there, and deputy in command at the time. And then, we were good friends other than then. Abiy came to power, and we had a little bit of friendship, and then that also became messed when they decided to take certain parts of Somalia through that, you know that thing. So he told me, Farah, I took 6,000 men into the Mogadishu stadium. And do you know how many of them came out alive? 60. 5,940 were killed in there. So there it tells you, an African power right now going into what you call Haiti to pacify it, and these Haitians are known to be people who don't care about death, then we might also end up with what Ethiopia, the lesson Ethiopia learned. You try to take in as superpowers, they're also scared of going in there the way it is right now. So what happens? Then, of course, the Islamic Courts, a kind of a solution had to be reached. The Ethiopians left the country, literally pulled out and took off cut line and ran for their lives. And then there was, of course, the truce that happened in Djibouti, in which part of the Islamic Courts, or the leadership of the Islamic Courts, went into some kind of a collision with the existing political elements that were doing something here in Bagathi. You remember that time? In Bagathi talks for all those years, which was a very good thing in my opinion. And eventually, of course, a semblance of government was created. Now that semblance of government is what's keeping us even now going progressively. Initially it was working from outside the country, from Nairobi to be exact. They went to Baidawo, then finally went to Mogadishu. And right now you have a government in Mogadishu with its own security machinery. There are challenges. Al-Shabaab is there, which is an offshoot of the Ethiopian occupation of the place. And of course with a lot of foreign elements, the same people who destroyed Libya and the rest of it, who are basically working, doing the bidding for the Americans and the British. When you hear about Al-Shabaab is an agent of the British, the Americans, and the Israelis. Everybody knows that. The people just don't want to talk loud about it. And they're using certain Arab, what do you call, contractors. I would just call them contractors, like the Emirates and the rest of them. So the way I see it myself right now is to see how we can draw out, first of all, create a discussion in a friendly African country in which you say you're going to bring in all the stakeholders in Haiti to come and talk here. So which means Barbecue comes in with his people, the political class outside comes in, the middle class, which is a very powerful one in the States, brilliant guys, professors in the universities, they're some of the most hardworking. I mean, much more hardworking than anybody else. If you see Haitians, I've had a chance to see a few of them outside the country. And they are phenomenal in their own rights. It's just that they're never had in their own country. So in America, there are too many of them doing very well. So you bring a few of that together and give them an environment in which they can talk freely now and say which is the way forward. The same way we created in Bagathi here for Somalis, which is the way forward. I am sure with that kind of goodwill, with the African Union having a serious, what they call, entry into this thing, with African countries taking up this thing right now and disabusing themselves this notion of becoming agents for imperialists, which of course is what we'll be told now if we send our police force there. Because the Americans who engaged us, who are the Americans? Americans are looking to destabilize every third world country, particularly if you're black. And in any case, they have never been forgiven for defeating a white race over 200 years back. You see what I mean? And not only that, by the way, that was the beginning of the emancipation or the liberation of the entire Hispanic part. I'm talking about everything else. Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, parts of Brazil, the so-called the father of Latin America. What was his name?
Bolivar. Simon Bolivar.
Simon Bolivar. Simon Bolivar came in and was given those lessons in he lived in Haiti as a young man and got the support of the Haitians, and they went in there to fight those independence wars. And the father of South America, Central America, the so-called Hispanics. And that country not only changed itself, but it changed the continent. And what was the condition? Every time you liberate a country, you free all the slaves. Every time. That was the only condition given to Simon Bolivar, which I think he observed. I don't know how much to the letter he observed, but that basically was the case. So what I'm basically trying to say is that let's find an African, a black, involvement in this thing in a manner that essentially would bring a few people. You can bring in the Jamaicans, you can bring other people, but at the same time, bring all the forces, all the different forces, including the ones who are right now in Haiti, and have an understanding. And on the basis of that, let's see, it might take a little longer, The way he took the Somali case has taken ages. It might take a little longer, but I have a feeling that that is going to work in the long run. That is going to work in the long run. Anything else is a sure, it's a sure failure, massive failure, and that might again push us back or push the possibility of getting stable Haiti even many more years backwards.
So do you hold with this view, or for them really coming here to have these negotiations here? We begin from Kenya.
I think Mheshimiwa Farah, has raised something. It is true, Haitians don't trust foreigners, especially of European descent, at all. But Haitians generally have had a soft spot for Africans, including their voodoo religion, which is now also recognized, as religion. But when you sit with them, they talk very fondly about, the continent. My friends who came, most of them, it was the first time, they were kissing the ground actually as they landed. That is how much connection they demonstrated, with the continent. And so, to that extent, is going perhaps a black country may be more ideal for convening something like that than, let's say, if you were to hold this in Paris, or you're holding it, somewhere else. So that becomes important. But two, to perhaps, also speak to what Prophet mentioned about a barbecue, making jokes that either we have barbecue for dinner, or we talk to him, or we will be barbecued. Okay, and we have to choose, between that. And the reason is, as horrible as he may sound, he represents a lot of the sentiment of the people, and he's a de facto leader. He has more legitimacy than the politicians, That is how he's been able to be successful, and that's why he has a lot of followers. So either we're eliminating him, which of course creates its own complications. We find a way, how can we be able to co-opt him in a way in which he can become, useful? It doesn't mean he has to become our friend, We just can have a strategic way in which we can be able to ensure that some of his interests in terms of, because he claims to speak on behalf of the people. Remember, he doesn't look at himself as a gang leader, just like Boko Haram. He looks at himself as a representative of the people. So how are we going to approach that in a way that we actually don't find ourselves in those kind of three dilemmas? And I think the best way is to have a lot more comprehensive approach. Kenya will play its part. But you see, we may not have a lot of resources, but I think Kenyans, we are not stupid. And so we should move into this with our ears and eyes, wide open. We should extract, certain commitments of a more comprehensive approach in helping Haiti, because we don't want to be a country that went into Haiti and failed miserably. It's not going to reflect very well on us, despite our good intentions. And Kenyan men and women in uniform have a good reputation of peacekeeping.
All right. Finally, let's wrap up on it with you, Ken.
Well, maybe let me begin from where Hassan has left. It's Professor Ali Mazrui who used to say that there's a way in which terrorists of yesterday becomes liberators today, nationalists. Villains of yesterday becomes heroes of today, and we need to think about that as we deal with Pepaque, because he will ultimately be the freedom fighter, the Mandela of Haiti at some point. I wanted to raise quite a few points. One, of course, Prof, any pacification expedition to Haiti, it doesn't matter who will lead it, it's going to be protracted and bloody. I'm lucky that I teach a course. I've sent you my course outline, Diba, on revolutions in world history. And last week we chose to start with the Haitian Revolution. And I like what one of my students said in that discussion, that it is near impossible to defeat a group of people whose bravery and courage is steeped in the fact that they defeated Napoleon Bonaparte of France, one of the greatest soldiers and statesmen that Europe has ever produced. And I agreed with this student. And as we go in, that history will be very critical for us to understand. And I like what Mheshimiwa Farah was saying earlier. You see, Haiti is what we loosely call in scholarship an ungoverned space right now. And there is a way in which you deal with governed spaces. And historically we have examples showing very clearly that internal solutions are better than external ones when it comes to finding solutions to some of these spaces that have been ungoverned for very long. And therefore, the thing is, find a way of building consensus, do a bit of quote-unquote community engagement to come up with an internally universally acceptable solution. And I like the example that he gave of Somalia, and I felt like he should be part of my class of revolutions in world history.
He should come to give a bit of a lecture.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be more than glad.
He's got some good rich stream of information as far as that is concerned.
Just in case there's a misunderstanding.
Yes.
Yes, I said in the final analysis, the world has to make up its mind. Yeah? If you don't want to talk to barbecue and cut deals with him and other people, and the situation continues to be as bad as it is, a decision has to be made at one point or another. It's an international responsibility. And I said it is not a police action.
It's a military action.
It's a military action. That will be the final, you really are going, you are not playing games,
Yes.
And you are not discussing, just going there. And you call it pacification or whatever it is, it has to come to that. I don't think we are there yet, but we have to consider that as a reality. Otherwise, we are not.
As we've withdrawn so far, we've withheld sending these troops, is it a good time maybe to make that critical decision of swapping to...
That is why I say we either have him for dinner,
Yeah.
okay,
Oh,
which meaning it is an enforcement mission,
Yeah.
okay, hard power, you go in and literally burn everything up and make sure all the leaderships and stuff like that is decapitated. We know the limits of that in terms of super hard power. It has serious limits. Or we find a way, how are we going, considering that he's controlling, remember, the art of war and sanctions. Yes. In a way in which we can give him an off-ramp, and perhaps regularize, some of his people to make sure they can become part of official vigilantes to provide protection and maybe get a path towards becoming police. Because remember, this person served in the police before.
They are police officers.
Yeah, they're police officers. So he's not just a thug who's coming from outside. So he understands the terrain very well. Or we have a lot more comprehensive approach that is going to talk, it's going to be a multi-year engagement, a lot more comprehensive with guaranteed support. Because right now, the way things stand, it's extremely uncertain. So despite our good intentions and the sacrifices we're willing to make, we also have to sit back and ask ourselves a number of questions because we are putting our men and women in uniform in harm's way. Let's be honest.
Thank you. Right. All right, let's wait for Monday. We see if that transitional government will come to play, and we shall be updating you as well. But talking about U.S., we have U.S. officials who've traveled to Niger. They traveled to Niger last week to express concerns about the country's potential development of ties to Russia and Iran before the ruling junta on Saturday revoked an accord governing the roughly 1,000 military personnel there. The Pentagon said this on Monday. The Pentagon added that it was seeking clarification about the way ahead. Niger said on Saturday it had revoked with immediate effect its military accords with the United States that had allowed Pentagon personnel to operate on its soil. U.S. officials expressed concern over Niger's potential relationship with Russia and Iran. According to Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh, high-level Russian defense officials, including Yunus Bek Yekrukov, Russia's deputy defense minister, have visited the country and met with the junta leader. The prime minister of the ruling junta, Ali Mahamane Lamine Zain, visited Iran in January. Let's just also talk about that latest development as well. We begin with you, Dr. Kanenje, because it seems now anything that it seems to be foreign is being revoked around Africa. And this is the latest that we can see as far as Niger is concerned. But it's a sovereign state. They have a right to associate with whoever they want. What would you say?
Yeah, well, it's not everything that seems foreign because they are still welcoming others. For instance, Muscovites seems to be a lot more, welcome in Niger and the Sahel than, the West. And the question mostly has been France and the United States, and of course the collective West and the perception of the collective West's role in Niger. Remember the joke we made here a while ago about someone being asked a question about the natural resource of Niger, and they said uranium, and then the natural resource of France, and the person said it's Niger. You see, and and so you have years. The Sahel. I think sometimes when we live in Kenya in relative comfort, despite our mess, Kenya is actually a fairly advanced country, economically, infrastructurally, comparatively to those countries. Those countries are really poor, extremely. And yet these countries have a lot of resources. But then the history, especially of Western engagement and, principally, having come from the French as a former colonial power, to many Francophonie people in West Africa has been negative. Now, with the collapse of the state of Libya and the escalation of terrorist activities in the Sahel and in West Africa, it destabilized most of those countries as a direct consequence, of course, again, of Western actions in Tripoli. And so, quietly, you've had populations becoming extremely dissatisfied, and human beings will like quick answers and quick solutions. It does not help that these countries, despite the effort, especially in supporting fighting terrorism in West Africa, or at least the kind of engagements they were having, the perception that that engagement is only informed by their selfish interests is something that went away. It didn't help the fact that a number of these Western countries, who are also partners to Kenya, and Kenya is a very good friend to most Western countries, they did not read the signs of time and try to side with the populations of those countries. I think is a lesson that Ecowas has learned recently, that whatever action they took against those three countries were very unpopular, including in their own countries.
Counterproductive.
And counterproductive, and not legitimate, at least according to the people, that they have revoked those sanctions, they had imposed on those countries. And they realize ECOWAS is actually going to collapse as a result of that. And so our Western partners misread this. But also that coupled with the attitude, mostly that tends to be paternalistic, and I'm saying this with all the love we have with our friends in the West, because we're not enemies, it is something that has triggered, the populations. And what is important for them to watch is this trend will keep spreading, There is a need for a policy change and a shift in thinking. Now, one thing we have had, especially since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, is that some of the behavior of African states is being influenced a lot more by Russian propaganda or maybe Chinese propaganda. The truth is actually totally different. This feeling and this sentiment has permeated the African continent and people on this continent for a very, very long time. It's only coming out now. You see, it's only coming out now. And so it is unfortunate because when you have partners, of course, who are helping you fight the terror problem, which we also face, you want to be able to maintain that. But then when it is an appearance that there are other interests that are ulterior and they're not serving the interests of the citizens of those countries, of course, have a right to choose their friends. So neither can we be able to lecture to them who they should and should not deal with, because that policy, and Blinken, when he was here at the beginning of the conflict, he went to South Africa, he actually mentioned that we're not going to choose friends for you, because South Africa was very direct with regard to making its position known that, you cannot choose our friends for us. And so we're still going to engage Western countries, and Kenya is a country that is very friendly to Western democracies. We have to be honest and frank enough to tell them that there are things which you're not doing right, that perhaps your approach needs to change, because all of us want to live in a freer, democratic world, not in a dictatorship, not in theocracies and stuff like that. But if we cannot tell each other the truth, we tell each other what we want to hear instead of what we need to know, then our friendship is based on false premises.
All right. Could we hear from from Kendon? We'll come to.
Just briefly, Diba, you see, there is a general situation in Africa at the moment which presents really a serious backlash against the West, generally. Whether you're talking about the West African situation with regard to France and America, but even in Anglophone countries, there are sort of feelings that these guys have sat on us for far too long. But the unfortunate thing about this, with regard to Niger and many other countries that have severed their links with France, particularly in West Africa, is that they are running away from the hands of one imperialist to those of another. Because they are doing this really on the behest and being egged on by Russia because of the problem that it has with Ukraine and the problem with NATO generally, in what I see as some kind of this crampant partition for Africa too. But then this is going, as I see it, going to turn out to be a zero-sum game. The more African countries are going to gain by going on the side of Russia, the more they will lose. Mm-hmm. Because I know for sure, and history is replete with examples, that poor countries don't have friends. Friends come in form of benefactors. Mm-hmm. And any imperialist who comes as a benefactor really it doesn't mean well in my view. So whichever side we go, if there are any kind of benefits, I think they will be temporary.
All right. Let's hear from Mashar. We'll come to you.
Sure it's not my turn?
It's your turn, eh? Yeah, actually it's your turn. Yeah, it is your turn. So sorry, Farah.
Yeah. No, I totally disagree with the last professor, Daktari. And when I say that, I want to also express how much I value his wisdom and his brilliance on many issues. The Russians never colonized us. They never enslaved us. They never exploited us. They did everything. The first doctors from here, 400 is from Luo Nyanza. Over 450 young men were taken from here, some of them in as low as being in standard 8 those days. And they were taken to all those so-called Soviet republics that were there those days and came back as consultants. They actually packed what was called the Joint Admissions Board in the universities some 15, 20 years back. They did everything right for us. They helped us liberate ourselves from the traditional, historical, customary exploiters and enslavers and colonizers that we had. If it's not for Russian and Cuban efforts, the South would not be independent today. Angola, Namibia, you get my point? All of those countries, South Africa. Yeah. So sometimes you get the feeling that even they themselves, one guy told me one time, what does it take for an African to appreciate the good that's done for him? Why is it that we have done all these good things for them? We've never done anything bad to them, and they still love the same ones who had their feet on their neck more than us. I said it's because of genes. You know what, those days, you remember that? Because of genes and because of Hollywood, nothing else. And all that stuff, that glittery stuff, that essentially is not anything. Today, those countries that are, now there is a Russophile movement. And Prof is a member of that. I am a member of that. I don't make any pretenses about it. I support the Russians, and I think we as Africans, if we cannot appreciate what Russia has done for the African continent, then we are a bunch of ingrates. You get my point? I mean, sometimes they say, when you're colonized too much, it's like you miss it. You know what I mean? What it's called? the Swedish syndrome.
There's a withdrawal syndrome.
The Swedish Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm, yes.
Because Stockholm is the capital of Sweden.
That capital,
Sweden,
yes,
I didn't miss it so much. It's a Stockholm syndrome of some kind. These guys, and right now, I don't understand what's wrong with the black men. They gave us, what, 200,000 tons of fertilizers for us to go and use, and grains. They gave us massive grains. They gave us massive fertilizers. And they're fighting their own wars. By the way, they don't need you to fight for them against the imperialist West. They've already defeated them. If they wanted to get over with Ukraine in a week, they would have done it. This is an old republic of theirs, so they went through it progressively and slowly and make sure that there's as little damage as possible to them. And of course, Ukraine is going to collapse.
All right.
Let me just finish. Ukraine is going to collapse anytime. So I think what the three young men from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have done is in my opinion, I mean, nobody else except Mandela. Mandela, when we were going towards dismantling of the apartheid, and he went to the US after he was released from Robben Island, and they were telling him, oh, with Gaddafi and the rest. He says, no, you cannot choose our friends for us. We know who our friends are. These people fought with us when you were the integral part of the oppression that was on our heads. And you did every awful thing to us, and you supported them. So today, because we're going to establish something called democracy, which is akin to a way of doing politics, you expect us to forget about Colonel Gaddafi and Fidel Castro, and he mentioned a third guy, and he said there's no way. And Russia, for that matter. So the point I'm trying to say is that all this human rights nonsense you hear, does not exist in the US. Otherwise, Floyd Patterson would not have somebody's feet on his neck until he passed out. And everybody knows what the black man in America is doing now. For how many centuries? From the 15th century when the slaves were taken in there, up to now the 22nd century, 700 years. And so basically what I'm saying is that Africa is moving. The West is losing. You see what I mean? The Western civilization is on its way to hell. You know what I mean? And nobody's going to mourn it. I'm not going to mourn it. I can't speak in Russian. I speak very good English. You can see all of us speak English. We are all in our country here called Kenya, and we are still conversing in English language as a medium of, because I don't understand your mother tongue, and none of us understands the others. We are still using English. But with that same English, I'm going to tell you that the English civilization is going to hell. It's collapsing. You know what I mean?
Well, we need to go. We need for a short break, because I think even that one still is a symptom of Stockholm syndrome that you're talking about here. Yeah?
No.
with the English that we do have, we still have. That's no start.
What
yeah.
I'm saying is that
We need to take a short break.
I mean, right now, to send your student, your own son, to go and study in the West, you're literally going to have to sell your house, you know what I mean? Because it goes into hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Thank you.
But in Russia, you get a scholarship and you hardly pay for his upkeep only.
All right. Okay. We need to take a short break right now.
That.
We'll suck you back with more of this as well, where we have US also are saying they're getting mixed signals from Niger on future of US troops. This is according to the US general. As he said there that, as you saw over the course of the week, there was some announcement from Niger about our relationship. But even since then, there have been some mixed signals that we received, Brown told reporters during a news conference at Ramstein Air Base in